Random thoughts. In this video, I'm going to talk about the composition of the Adal Sultanate. In my previous video, I talked about the ethnic background of Ahmad bin Ibrahim Al-Ghazi or Gurey. And then I did see a few comments, of course, people telling me that no, he was actually a Somali. Because in the video I said that it's not very clear that he was a Somali. And but I didn't say that he wasn't a Somali. I just say that I leaned more towards the thought of him being an Harari. And there are people who told me that he had relatives who were Somali, which is actually true. Reading the Futu al-Habasa, the writer who is Harab Faki, does mentioned in a few places in the book where the relatives of Gurey are clearly Somali. For example, there is someone who is mentioned who goes by the name Matan bin Uthman bin Khalid, and he is a Somali, and he was a leader of a Somali clan or sub-clan called Giri, and he was the brother-in-law to the Imam, and he was married to the sister of the Imam who went by the name Fardusa. So that's one incident where we have a relative of the Imam who is clearly a Somali, like it's clearly mentioned that he's a Somali. Another example is somebody who was leading a tribe called the Zarba, a clan, I think, or a sub-clan of the Somali people called Zarba. He was a sultan, and his name was Sultan Muhammad, and he was the son of paternal aunt of the Imam. So, and he is described, this Sultan Muhammad is described to be a Somali, clearly a Somali, there is no doubt about that. And he is said to have been the leader of a clan or a sub-clan called Zarba. So yeah, in the book Futu al-Habasa, there are people who are mentioned who are clearly Somali, who are relatives of the Imam. But we can't use that to conclude that he was actually a Somali because, and that comes to the topic of this video, the composition of the Adal Sultanate was a little bit more complex, and it wasn't necessarily the case that people married within their own community, so that we can say that because his son-in-law is a Somali, then he must be a Somali. Or his cousin, in the case of Sultan Muhammad, was a Somali, then it means that the Imam was a Somali. And I'm not saying he wasn't, but going by details I'm getting from this book, it's not very clear that he was. In fact, there is more evidence to suggest that he was an Harari. Now, of course, as I've said, there are people in the comment section who told me the Adal Sultanate was a Somali Sultanate. And that's a very interesting way to look at things. At least reading this book, Futu al-Habasa, we have a lot of details about the ethnic composition of the Sultanate. Now, I think the Adal Sultanate is a very complex commonwealth, if I might call it so, because, and I think it goes against the general myth, especially about African, we can call the republics or commonwealth, to have a more general word. There is this thinking that African commonwealth were mostly single ethnic commonwealths. And that's not true, actually. It's not true. There are so many commonwealths in Africa that were composed of people from different ethnic backgrounds, and the Adal Sultanate is one of those, actually. And even their enemies, the Abyssinian monarchy or empire, was actually a commonwealth that was composed of people from very many ethnic backgrounds. And in fact, even in the book, he does mention a few of the different groups of people who were part of the Abyssinian empire. Now, coming back to Adal, yes, as I've said, Adal, alongside Abyssinia, of course, and I think many other commonwealths that emerged in Africa, they were not single ethnic group commonwealths. And that is something that for some weird reasons is never acknowledged or accepted, generally speaking. Many people assume that if we are going to talk of an African empire that existed between the arrival of the colonial powers, or we talk of a sultanate or an empire or a republic, then automatically it has to have been based on a single ethnic group. It's not the case, and for sure it was not the case with the Adal Sultanate. Now, The short answer is that the Adal Sultanate cannot be described as a Somali Sultanate. And I know many people will not like it when I say that. It wasn't. Going by whatever records we can get today, it was not. And its primary identity wasn't based on ethnic. It was based on religion. It was a Muslim society, and it was organized and run as that. It did not matter your ethnic background. If you went there, you could easily fit in and become part of that society, as long as you, of course, you are a Muslim. In the book Futu al-Habasa, Arab Faki mentions so many tribes that were part of the Adal Sultanate. He doesn't like list them like on a single page, but as you read the story that he tells, he mentioned that this emir was from this group of people, and this emir was from this group of people, this commander was coming from this group of people. And that's how I got to get a very long list of different ethnic groups that existed in the Adal Sultanate. Now, of course, the Somali were part of it. But as I said in the previous video, when you read this book, it becomes apparent that most of Somalis lived outside the Adal Sultanate. There were so many Somalis who were not citizens of the Adal Sultanate, and they never became citizens of the Adal Sultanate. But I need to mention that during the war between the Adal Sultanate and Abyssinia, Imam Gurey did reach out to some of the other, we can call them commonwealths, maybe sultanates, smaller ones that were their neighbors, and they were Islamic sultanates, of course. He did reach out to those, and they did provide him with support. So he did get that support from even people who were not actually citizens of the Adal Sultanate. But it's very clear that by reading, at least by reading this document, and I need to point out this document was written in 1559. That's like 16 years after the death of Gurey. So, but there was a sizable population within the Adal Sultanate that was of Somali origin. There were citizens who were Somali in ethnicity. What we will never know for sure is the percentages, for example. We'll never know whether they were 30% of the population of the Sultanate, or they were 50%, or even 60%. At least from this document, seems like that can never come. That fact is not existing. And I don't think there will be a document out there that can give us reliable numbers regarding that question as to the exact composition of the different groups of people within the Sultanate. But what we can get is at least the acknowledgement that there were different groups of people who were part of the Sultanate. Now, as I've said, the Somali people were part of it. There were Arabs. Even the writer of this book himself was an Arab from Yemen. So there were Arabs who were part of the Adal Sultanate, who were citizens actually. There were Harari, of course, and nobody can dispute that Harari people were part of the Adal Sultanate. They were part of it. There were the Balo people. They are mentioned in the document as being part of the Sultanate. There were people called the Sagara people. I've never heard of these people, and if you've heard of them, you can let me know in the comment section whether they still exist today and what they are called today, or if they don't exist, then what likely happened to them. There are the Dawaro people. They are mentioned several times in the book, actually. There are the Sawa people. They are mentioned in the book a few times. There are the Argaya people. In the document, there is somewhere it is mentioned that there was someone who was appointed to be their leader, and he was a brother of the Imam, and he went by the name Muhammad bin Ibrahim. There are the Jarir people, and there are the Yamli people, and then there are the Malasai people. These are some of the people or groups of or ethnic groups that are mentioned in the book, and that tells you that the composition of the Adal Sultanate was very diverse. There were people from different ethnic groups that formed that society, and as I've said, the Adal Sultanate was not based on ethnic. And I don't think it's appropriate for us today to start assigning that to it. The primary identity of that sultanate was religion. It wasn't ethnic composition. The Adal Sultanate wasn't a Somali sultanate. It wasn't. It was a sultanate that had Somali population. Most likely a significant part of the population was Somali, but it also had people from other groups who were part of that society. And as I've said, we might never know the actual percentage composition of the citizenry of that sultanate. Those are my random thoughts.